Thank you so much for joining us for this session of the Duke Postdoc Virtual Orientation with the Office for Institutional Equity. And today we are joined by Nikki Stovall and Aaron McDonald from OIE. Please note that we are recording this session. So this is going to be a general overview of OIE policies and procedures. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to OIE directly. So having said that, Nikki and Aaron, thank you so much for coming, and please take it away.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So good morning, my name is Aaron McDonald, and I am an Equity Compliance Investigator with the Office for Institutional Equity, or OIE. And I'm here today with my colleague, Nikki. She's also an investigator with OIE. And today, as Molly said, what we'd like to do is just provide a brief overview of our office and focus a little bit more on the role of the compliance team, which Nikki and I are part of. And as we're sharing information, please feel free to ask questions, or we should have some time available at the end if you'd like to ask questions. And Nikki, anything else you want to share before we get started?
Sure, I guess I'll just introduce myself. My name, as you know, is Nikki Stovall. I have been with OIE now for just a couple of years. Recently moved into an investigator position over here. I previously did some intake work, so I can certainly answer questions as it pertains to our process and kind of what things look like as you come initially to OIE. But I'll just go ahead and let you get started.
Well, I didn't give any background information, so I can do that as well. So I've been with, I actually just celebrated my 2nd year anniversary here at OIE as an investigator. And prior to that, I was in a similar role at UNC Chapel Hill. So I've been doing this work for a few years now. And so what we'd like to do today is just kind of, as Molly said, give you a brief overview of things. Some of the pieces that we'd like to cover in this session, we have listed up here, the type of information that should be reported to OIE. What actually happens when something is reported to our office? What do we do next? How much information is shared by our office with others, and what kind of information, how much, and with whom? At the end of the process, what happens? Types of support and resources that are available to persons that may participate, and options that are available in lieu of a formal investigation. We do things other than just have formal investigations. Information sharing at the end of the investigation. What kind of information can impacted persons share, from what they've experienced, and any other questions that you may have. And you can leave it on that for a second, Nikki. I just want to talk a little bit about OIE's role. You may be familiar with our office, but just generally, our office is here to promote and support work and learning environments that are inclusive, that are respectful, and that reflect the community behavioral values. That's really important, not just our office, but for everyone here that's participating and joining our community. So what OIE will do is we respond to concerns and assess and investigate complaints of protected class harassment, discrimination, and related misconduct. We also educate the university community on issues related to diversity, anti-racism, to equity and inclusion. We also manage the university's affirmative action plan. And to help achieve those goals, we've got 3 teams in OIE. And so, like I said, Nikki and I are part of the compliance team, which includes the investigators, includes intake and assessment managers. We have a DEI team, and we have the affirmative action team that also works with like pay equity issues and fair and equitable hiring practices. Okay. Things that we do to try to achieve these goals, these lofty goals that are so important. Well, we create, administer transparent and responsive policies. We provide education and training, like our session here today. And we have consistency in how we respond to reported conduct, but we also work to adapt policies and procedures as needed, okay? And so that's sort of, I guess, a general overview of what we do. Nikki, can you move to our next slide? And so the scope of OIE's jurisdiction, what exactly is it that we look at, and what kind of reports and things do we work on? So we work with concerns that are involving these protected statuses, all of which are listed here, and these are also in our policy, which is the Policy on Prohibited Discrimination, Harassment, and Related Misconduct, or the PPDHRM, or just the policy. And that policy was adopted in 2019, and it was just recently updated as of September 2022. And this is all available on our website, oie.duke.edu. There's a section at the top, a tab, and it says policies and procedures, and all of this is available there. But I want to kind of go over this a little bit, and all these protected statuses, they are defined in our policy, but just general overview. I want to kind of go over some things. In terms of age, regarding employment discrimination or harassment, that threshold age is 40 years, so 40 and older in that employment scope. But there is no age threshold for students or persons participating in educational programs or activities, okay? And I want to go over a little bit about color, because a lot of times people will ask, well, what's the difference in color and race? Well, color for protected status, that's going to relate to someone's skin tone or complexion or shade. Disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Gender is a social or cultural expectation. It's generally associated with someone's sex that's assigned at birth. In terms of gender identity, that's going to be one's innermost concept of self. That may or may not be the same as the sex assigned at birth. So that's the difference between gender and gender identity. In terms of gender expression, that's usually something that's expressed outwardly, like someone's behavior, clothing, outward appearance typically is associated with like those cultural expectations of masculine or feminine. So that would be gender expression. Genetic information is related to one's health, like their genetic tests of family members, manifestation of diseases or disorders. National origin would be one's actual or perceived country of origin or ethnicity of origin. Race, that's going to be actual perceived racial or ethnic ancestry or associated physical characteristics, can include one's color, height, weight, facial features, hairstyle, hair texture. That would all be under the protected status of race. Religion is related to one's religious observances, practices, or beliefs. Now, sex incorporates a lot. So sex is a designation at birth, generally based on the external appearances of sex organs. This protected status also includes pregnancy, it includes childbirth and related medical conditions. And it also includes conduct of a sexual nature. So any of that would fall under that protected status of sex. Sexual orientation is related to one's attraction or lack thereof to others. Includes sexual attraction, romantic, emotional attraction. And then we have veteran status as well. Now, what's really important about this is that protected classes also include that perception of a protected class. So you don't have to necessarily be part of that protected class, but if someone perceives you as a protected class, you do receive that protected class protection. So for example, if there are anti-Semitic slurs directed at someone, even if they're not Jewish, you may fall under that protected status. If you don't have a disability, but someone perceives you as that, you have that protected status on that. So that's really important and something to note, because a lot of times people don't understand that. But that perception is also one of the scopes, and that protection applies to those people. Our scope also includes Title IX matters, conduct on the basics of sex, severe, pervasive, objectively offensive, that effectively denies someone equal access to university program or activity, non-Title IX sexual misconduct. And we also handle related misconduct, including protected status or protected activity retaliation. So that would be an adverse action or some kind of negative treatment, such as intimidation, threats, discrimination, harassment, based on a protected activity. So for example, good faith reporting to our office, opposition to harassment or discrimination, participating in our OIE process, like as a party or witness. All of those are things that are protected activity that would protect someone from being retaliated against. So that's sort of just generally the scope of some of the matters that come into our office. And then when we're handling these matters, there are 3 complaint handling procedures. So there's 3 different procedures that we can move forward under. And again, this is all on our website, but there's 1 for Title IX matters. And then we have 2 for non-Title IX matters, but 1 non-Title IX where the respondent is a student, and 1 where the respondent is a faculty member or staff, so not a student. So we have 3 of those. We have that one policy, PPDHRM, and then those 3 complaint handling procedures. And I think that's it for scope. Nikki, do you have anything you want to add on that?
I don't think so. You did a good job.
Okay. I'm actually going to ask you to go to that next slide, actually number 4. Oh, do we have a question?
No, is it gonna we'll get to the questions at the end, so that
Okay.
we can just get kind of, yeah.
Will you go to the next slide though?
Sure.
I'm going to
Of
talk
course.
about, I want to talk about responsible employees. And before I say who might be a responsible employee, I want to kind of talk about what the responsibility is if you do have that designation. So these are persons designated by the policy, and the key word is these persons are required to consult and share known details of an incident to OIE, telephone, email, or online reporting form. So if you have that designation, you are required, if you have a matter that you're aware of that might, be under OIU's jurisdiction, you're required to report to us. So that's what that is. Now, Nikki, can you go back for me? Now, who is a responsible employee? This is information that's all in our policy. And I'll read it to you quickly, but it's faculty members, employees with teaching or supervisory authority, graduate students with teaching or supervisory authority, members of the Board of Trustees, president, vice president, deans, directors, department chairs, academic administrators, coaches, HR reps, managers, principal investigators, lab managers, nurse managers, RAs, teaching assistants, acting within that capacity, student affairs, athletic department professionals. These are all responsible employees, okay? So if you have that designation, you're a responsible employee, and if you become aware of certain, matters that would fall under OIU's jurisdiction, there is that responsibility and that requirement to report to our office. Responsible employees are not confidential resources. So if you're a confidential resource, you're not a responsible employee. And we do tell people that even if you're not in that responsible employee designation, we are always encourage, any kind of member from our community, the new community, students, faculty, staff, visitors, everyone always encouraged to report prohibited conduct, because the goal is always to have a welcoming, inclusive, diverse environment. We want everyone here to feel welcome. So in terms of responsible employees, one of the things I want to highlight is that if you do have that designation, what we wouldn't want people to do is if someone comes to you and says, hey, I have this matter that I want to talk to you about, we wouldn't want people to say, no, don't, hold on, I'm a responsible employee, I'll have to share this. It's important to let people know on the front end, if you can, that you do, but we do want people to report. So what's important is to let people know, hey, you can share this with me, but I do have reporting obligations. If persons are not ready to do that, make sure that they're aware of confidential resources so they can at least get support resources if they're not ready to share with you, but to share with somebody. And that's things like for students, CAPS, counseling and psychological services. There's an ombuds, personal assistance service, PAS for employees, clergy working in that capacity as clergy. So there's lots of support and resources. And that's one of the key things. We want people to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. And also, make sure that they know who to report to, when they're ready to report, who they can go to. So that's a really important piece, I think, of being a responsible employee if you do have that designation. Nikki, anything else you want to add on that piece?
I think specific to postdocs, right? It's, am I considered a responsible reporter? Do I know who would be considered a responsible reporter around me? I think the biggest thing for postdocs is I understand in talking with Molly that at times postdocs may serve as kind of the stand-in lab manager, or may have times where they're kind of temporarily appointed to be in these supervisory roles. So in the event that that is something that takes place, if you happen to, this person's going to be out for a week or two, I'm going to go ahead and step in as lab manager, you would then fall under this responsible employee designation. And so that's something to be mindful of. If in that role, somebody does report prohibited conduct to you, or conduct that you feel like may fall within the scope of our office, you would have a responsibility to report that to us. So it is important, and I know it can be kind of confusing, but while in that role, you would fall under this designation.
That's helpful. And let me add one more thing on here. If anyone has questions about whether you are a responsible employee, or you have questions about those responsible employee duties, you can always contact our office for clarification. If you're ever wondering about that. So there is that piece on there. The other thing, it's important for a responsible employee. They do have that requirement, as I said, to report. So even if you are a responsible employee and this person has told you, hey, I am going to report to OIE, you think that they've told you that they are, regardless, you still have that responsibility to report. So even if they say, I'm going to do it, or you believe that they have reported, under that designation, you are still required to report. So even if you think that they have done that, or going to, you still have that reporting obligation to make that report to OIE.
That's perfect. And that's a good segue into this next slide, which is, why do we need to report it? Why does that matter? I think first, a lot of times we'll hear individuals say, oh, I gave the employee OIE's information, or I encouraged them to reach out to you. While that's great, it's also really important that the responsible employee directly reaches out to us themselves. At times, OIE may have additional information related to a matter that you're not privy to. So we may see, perhaps on its face, this really doesn't seem like something that's serious. Maybe we'll be able to handle this, doesn't seem egregious. We could just handle this internally. But what you may not be aware of is perhaps our office has identified some pattern related to an individual, or we may be aware of additional individuals who have also reported or are being impacted by certain behavior. So that's why we just say to always err on the side of making our office aware. Another important reason to report is because Duke does have, as an institution, responsibilities related to federal regulations. As a institution that receives federal funds, it's important that we respond to concerns in a consistent manner that's also consistent with our policies and those regulations. So a lot of times individuals will obviously be more comfortable, I would say, reporting within the department to people that they interface with on a daily basis. A lot of times when you have concerns, you're talking to other postdocs, or you're talking to your PI or to your faculty members. If your concern is with your PI, perhaps you're talking to Molly, or you're talking to other, perhaps the department chair. It's important that if you do have a matter that you would like to report, or if you do have concerns that that you feel like fall within the scope of our policy, that you are aware of the fact that when you go to these trusted individuals, should you say, I want you to keep this in confidence, or I don't want my name associated with this, because of their designation as a responsible employee, they have to provide all known information that they have. And so a lot of times individuals will reach out to our office. I know as the former intake manager, I used to get calls from faculty members often that would say, this is what's taken place, but the student begged me not to share their name. They don't want their name associated. And typically, we'll share with individuals, I really need their name, because we need to provide resources. We need to be able to reach out to that impacted party. And so usually what we'll do is we'll have that faculty member or staff member follow back up with the student and let them know, I've got to disclose this information, and you'll be getting outreach from this particular office. As a postdoc or as an employee, you're more than welcome not to engage with our office. We are going to conduct outreach, but it is your choice, and you do have a lot of agency as to how much or how little you do engage with our office. So that is important to understand. Another reason to report is because the individuals here at OIE really have the expertise and skill set to address these concerns. While faculty, staff often have really great intentions, it's really important that the individuals who are prepared to assist and who are aware of resources are really making that direct connection with the person who's impacted. So those are just some reasons that it's super important to report. So this slide is just going to kind of, and I think this is really what most people want to know is what happens once I report? What is your process? Like, what can I expect? And I think that's a really great question. First and foremost, when OIE receives any type of concern or complaint, we always try to make contact with the impacted party if we're aware of who that person is. So at times people will file concerns that are anonymous. That does oftentimes limit the amount of follow-up that we can conduct, just because we're unable to get to that person and that source. It doesn't mean that we don't do anything. We do what we can, but a lot of times, if we have a reporter or somebody who has identified as having information, we will make that initial contact with them. We'll conduct what we call an intake meeting. You'll meet with our intake manager. During that meeting, you'll discuss our process. You can ask any questions that you might have, and then you'll have a platform to share what your concerns are. The intake manager will document those concerns. And really also discuss things such as supportive measures or, what we're going to do next. So at an intake, a lot of times people want to understand, okay, here's all of the information I have. Now, what are you all going to do? Typically, when determining next steps, we don't do that individually. And so a lot of times what will happen is the intake manager and our assistant vice president will meet on a regular basis to review all of the concerns that have come in and to really determine kind of the best approach at addressing those concerns. During that initial intake meeting, we may also discuss what we call supportive measures. Supportive measures are really interventions and things that we can put in place, such as no contact orders, potentially academic accommodations or employment modifications, things that are going to ensure that there's that we're fostering a stable environment in which we can resolve the situation. So supportive measures are available on a case-by-case basis and are typically determined by OIE and at times in consultation with the department. So after that initial intake meeting, the AVP and the intake manager will meet. They'll discuss kind of what are the best next steps, and should a situation really maybe not fall within the scope of the policy. So sometimes people will reach out to our office and they're having an issue with their PI or they're having an issue with a colleague. But what we find is that there's not really that protected status component, right? Perhaps, this person just seems to really have it out for me. And I think it's because I did better on this than they did, or, they'll provide some non-discriminatory rationale for the treatment that they're receiving. If that's the case, then we would easily be able to identify that's not something that necessarily is going to fall within the scope of our office. And so at that point, it may be that after intake, we provide something similar to a referral. It may be that we refer you to staff and labor relations, or if it's a disability issue where it's like, I really need an accommodation, we may refer you to the disability management system. So right there at intake, there are a few cases. We'll try to identify the matters that don't fall within our scope and provide the appropriate referral. If we do find that the conduct that is described during that intake meeting really warrants further intervention by our office, what we'll typically do is assign a case for an assessment. So we'll assign a case for an assessment with one of our equal opportunity and compliance investigators, which is what Erin and I do. Assessments are not investigations. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but an assessment is more of an objective review of their concerns and the information so that we can determine if an investigation is warranted. So typically an assessment will include, speaking with the impacted party, perhaps speaking with some witnesses who can provide additional information. It may be that part of the case can really be demonstrated in emails or text messages. So we'll gather a lot of that information to really make a determination as to whether or not an investigation is warranted. At times, we find during assessments that either the conduct doesn't really rise to a level in which it would implicate our policy or would be a policy violation, or we'll find that, based on what's shared with us, it's concerning behavior, but the person reporting is not interested in going through the formal investigation process. If that's the case, we may engage with our DEI team and conduct what we call like an alternative resolution. Those can consist of following up with the person who's alleged to have been engaging in that problematic behavior. It may be that the individual reaching out to our office just wants a facilitated conversation where there's a neutral party and I can kind of air what's been going on and maybe we can come to some type of agreement. It's important to know that when you come to OIE as a reporter, you don't lose your agency throughout this process. I think that's a big concern that individuals have, is I'm going to share this information with you and then I have no control of what happens next. There are very few cases where our office has to move forward in an investigation without the actual reporting party wanting to. And those are when the behavior is so egregious and so pervasive that it becomes kind of a safety issue here on campus. But otherwise, it is important to know that throughout this process, you have a lot of agency, and we listen to the things that you're hoping to receive as an outcome and really making decisions about the processes that will follow. If throughout the assessment process, we do determine that an investigation is warranted and that the behavior that's reported could potentially be a policy violation, then we will initiate an investigation. That's done by issuing notices. Those notices will go to the reporter or the impacted party. The complainant is kind of how we refer to that individual, and then also to the respondent or the person who engaged in the problematic behavior. Those notices will include parties' names, the allegations that have been reported to our office, what procedures the investigator will be utilizing in investigating, and then it'll give you a lot of links to resources as well. During an investigation, we try to communicate about the status of the investigation as much as possible, but individuals are always welcome to reach out to their investigator throughout that process to get status updates or to ask questions along the way. At the end of an investigation, a report is provided depending on the procedure. So depending on the type of concern, whether it's Title IX or whether it's a non-Title IX case, will determine kind of what that report looks like, what's in that report. And then for Title IX cases, we have to go to what we call a hearing. And we can kind of answer any questions specific to that, but I do want to get through this. I see our time ticking down. After an investigation, it's important to know OIE does not make determinations on sanctions or remedies. We do consult with departments, but it is at the department's discretion as to what type of sanctions are issued should there be some type of finding. If we do have a finding, we'll typically call a meeting with department leadership as well as staff and labor, and we'll consult and talk about what sanctions are appropriate. But we are not the ones who are implementing those sanctions or ultimately determining what those sanctions are. Two mouse. This is just something that's on our website about our reporting process. You'll see it's kind of a flow chart. It talks about, what happens. These are our steps. And then depending on the procedure that the complaint falls in, kind of what individuals can expect. So if you're interested in kind of looking through that, again, that is on our website. I think that's all we have. I know that we ran through that kind of fast and that was a lot of information, but you are always more than welcome to reach out to us. Here's our website. All of this information can be found on there. Here's our email address, and then here's our phone number, and you're welcome to kind of reach out. So I see that we have a few questions in the chat bar. I am going to go ahead and take a look at some of those. Have you provided special help for employees who are working here on visa status? From talking with international postdocs, the precariousness of visa status is a very scary aspect of reporting anything, especially against an advisor or an employer. Do you have any insight into that?
I have not personally, in terms of special help. What I would say is that emphasize that prohibition against retaliation. That is something, every person that we meet with, we review that prohibition against retaliation and make sure that people know that we don't want people to retaliate or feel retaliated, against others. And so that's one of the things that we really, really highlight in there. In terms of, and I understand that about the scary aspect, and people always feel that, you know, against an advisor or employer. So I don't know if there's any special help. I'm happy to get, you know, to consult with Cynthia, and if we have information, we can follow up with you, but not that I'm aware of a special help. Again, the prohibition against retaliation is something that we emphasize on there. Nikki, anything?
The only thing I would also say is a lot of times, you know, when considering retaliation, supportive measures are things that we can also put into place. So just because an individual has a concern, at times there are complaints or concerns that are very identifying in nature, right? So if I bring this forward, the person's going to immediately know who I am. In those cases, it can be really hard to put in place. It can be hard to kind of move forward on a concern like that in an anonymous way. But there are at times concerns related to an individual's behavior that everyone really is witnessing, or, hey, when this incident took place, there were 15 of us in the room. In that case, it wouldn't necessarily be a situation where we would have to disclose the person who reported it to our office. There are ways, and we are very intentional about the way that we move forward in an effort to minimize as much retaliation as we possibly can. And then, as Erin shared, should there be any type of retaliation based on reporting to our office or engaging with our office, we would look into that and oftentimes do open kind of a separate investigation into retaliation claims.
We can always look into that as a separate matter.
Yeah. The other question is there any way to verify that a responsible employee has adhered to the reporting protocol requirement? Great question. I would say that, like, is that more along the line, if they haven't, could they be in trouble type question, or can I reach out and find out if somebody has reported something? Do you have thoughts on the best way to answer that?
In terms of, I think, like you said, it'd be helpful if we had a little bit more information. Like, are you?
Right.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, wonderful. The question is, so say somebody has gone to their PIs, or, you know, multiple PIs, multiple people, and they've been made aware of such situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a question of, will they get in trouble if they don't report it as a responsible employee? But the question is, do they know they're supposed to report it as a responsible employee? Because in my experience and you know, speaking with other postdocs who have had experiences that they've reported to their supervisors, it seems like the reporting process is very, I guess, not well understood, including by these responsible employees. And so, can we rely on that, or should we not rely on this responsible employee protocol?
That's a good question. So I think first and foremost, we do everything that we possibly can to educate responsible employees on their obligations. So when individuals go through, whenever anybody moves into a managerial role here at Duke, they have to take a particular course. It's called the Guide to Management. So when they're enrolled in that, our office does have a piece of that in which we inform them of their duties as a responsible employee. We do our best to get out and really educate individuals on what their duties are. Mariah, as you're aware, Duke is huge. So I think it would be silly for me to think that every single human here at Duke who has a supervisory role is 1000% aware of what their responsibilities are. We do everything we can to ensure that that's the case, but I'm sure that there are some individuals out there who may not be aware of what those responsibilities are. As an individual with a concern, I would certainly, from my perspective, I feel like it's always helpful to go directly to us, but I also really do understand the fact that you've developed relationships with individuals and probably are more comfortable reporting your concerns to somebody you know, as opposed to kind of a stranger on the other line of the phone. So I understand that people go to the people within their department, but should someone have a concern, they also should feel very comfortable reaching out directly to us. And we're happy to engage with individuals who come directly to our office. And if you're, aware of individuals who you feel like would be helpful, hey, like I feel like this group is missing and they don't really understand what their responsibilities are, please let us know, because we'd be happy to provide any type of training or education to individuals needing it. Your other question, is there a way for reporters to visualize the status of the investigation? When you said that, I thought of like the Domino's tracker, where it's like, you see the like go from one to the other. I wish we had a tracker like that. I would say that we do our best to communicate. So when something is in the intake phase, we are very clear with individuals, hey, we're in the intake phase. We're still really determining what those next steps are. When something does move to an assessment, there is kind of a letter that's sent to somebody saying, hey, we've assigned your concern to an investigator for an assessment. And then certainly when there is an investigation, notices are issued on the front end of that. And investigators do their best to really keep people
updated as to what next steps are. And so on average, how long do investigations take to complete? So when it goes to a formal investigation, that's, after you've gone through the assessment and talked to, intake and such, and this is moved to an informal investigation. When notices are issued, so when those formal notices go out to the parties, that's the starting date for this formal investigation. And it's 90 business days is generally what it takes to complete that investigation. Now, sometimes it can be, it doesn't have to take that long. It might not be that long. And sometimes if they are complicated and they're complex and a lot of witnesses, there may be an extension. Parties are always made aware of that. They will receive a notice if it does need to be extended, but generally it's 90 business days, and that is in the that's in the procedures, and that's also in the notice. So the parties are aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good question. Timeline comes up a lot.
It does.
We know that our investigations take time. We know that typically when individuals reach out to our office, they're already in crisis. And so the idea that it's going to take a few months to get to some type of conclusion, but it's really important, because of the work and because of the concerns that come in, that we take things very seriously and that we're very thorough in really reviewing. We've had cases where somebody has submitted 800 pages. We review all 800 pages. It's important that we go through all of the information because because it's our job, and it's really it's important that individuals' concerns are addressed appropriately. The first question, I'm sorry, Suzanne, I missed your first one. It says, does OIE take anonymous reports from non-responsible employees? Absolutely. We take reports from anyone and everyone. Like I said, anonymously reporting can be a challenge just because it makes it really hard for us to follow up and gain context or understanding about the situation. And it also doesn't really give us a lot of insight into what the individual reporting is seeking. So while anonymous reports can be a great place to start, sometimes it does limit the amount of follow-up that we're able to do. Can all parties in the report be anonymous just so that there's a record of an incident occurring, even if the affected person doesn't want something to be reported?
If it goes to an investigation, the parties are not anonymous, because the person, like, for example, the respondent has to be on notice, and so they can respond appropriately. So if it does move into that investigation stage, then no, the parties in the report will not be anonymous.
I will say, in terms of witnesses, so can all parties in the report be anonymous just so there's a record of it, even if the affected person doesn't want something to be reported? So if there are witnesses and there are a lot of people who are like alleging something, but they're not the impacted party, a lot of time in our investigation reports, witnesses are given like a witness designation, like witness one, witness two, if it's non-Title IX, yes. Then they're given a witness designation where we don't necessarily provide the name. But again, it can be really challenging. That's why our office absolutely does not guarantee confidentiality. It can be really challenging when you're asking somebody, did this occur, or what did occur. They may need to know who was present or who was there in order to appropriately be able to respond. And so that's why we don't guarantee confidentiality.
Right, because even if you have a witness designation in those non-Title IX reports, the information that that person shares may be so specific that they may be recognized even if their name's not on there. And we're very clear with people when we meet with them, as Nikki said, that we can't guarantee confidentiality, but information is considered private and only shared on a need-to-know basis. I hope that helps.
The other question is, it sounds like follow-up from investigations is very department specific. Are there any university-wide policies about what happens if discrimination against a protected class is found in an investigation? So I think what you're getting at is, if the departments are making the determinations related to sanctions, how is that consistent, right? How do we ensure that that's consistent? And if you're in this department and you know, engage in this behavior, you know, this is the penalty, but in this department, it's very different, perhaps. That's why we do kind of call all of the folks to the table. At the end, we have staff and labor's involvement. At times, we'll have university council's involvement. And the reason for that is to make sure that there is some consistency there, and that there are, I wouldn't say guidelines, but that there is a consistent approach to sanctions that are issued following a finding of discrimination or harassment. And if an investigation verifies harassment or discrimination has occurred, what does OIE do? Can you give an example of what happens in the case of verified sexual harassment and verified discrimination based on unprotected status?
Well, and that's what you'd said is, so if it's like, you know, in a non-Title IX matter, that's when we would schedule a meeting with like the admins, departmental admins, staff and labor relations and or HR, you know, to kind of review and then make the determination about sanctions and remedies. Can we give an example of what happens? Well, we have to be very careful in terms of like the specifics of things like that. But, you know, if there is a policy violation, then that's when that meeting happens, and then they make that determination. And that's really case by case determination. Depends on the conduct, what may happen. You know, things, it might be that there's termination. It may be, you know, a separation for, you know, temporary. It just depends. And I think that's the best way that we can say that. It just depends.
Yeah, if you go on our website, I'm not sure if it's in the policy or the procedures, but there's an example of like types of sanctions that could be issued depending on whether or not there was a finding on a case. We also have on our website our annual report that gives some really good data related to how many cases have come in, how many cases did in fact have some type of finding, and that's just really good information that you can find on our website. But it does vary. It is case by case, but it is pretty consistent, I would say, across the board when there are findings. I think that's it.
Maybe it.
Yeah. Oh, one more. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you guys so much for Molly. I appreciate you for really giving us this platform. If any of you have questions or concerns or things that you did not want to put in the chat, if you do, of course, have something that you would like to report, we would really encourage you. You're more than welcome to reach out to our office. On our website, you'll find that there's a reporting incident link. I would encourage you to go that route in reporting your concern. It'll allow you to provide a lot of information, and it'll go directly into our database, and you'll get a response, I would say, within 24 to 48 hours, depending on kind of whether it's Friday, it might be on that following Monday. But always feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions or concerns.
Yeah, this was really, it's really helpful for us to go through and like Nikki said, it's so important to get the information about OIE out there. Sometimes policies and procedures can be a little overwhelming, or people don't know where to find it. So this is a great opportunity for us to come in and chat a little bit about our work and hopefully share some good information for y'all. So thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much, Nikki and Aaron. That was wonderful, so helpful. And thanks everyone for attending, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.